Judge Emily Thompson sat behind her mahogany bench, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. At 55, she had earned respect for being fair but firm. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the courthouse as she reviewed the days. Cases, her black robe hung perfectly pressed, and her reading glasses caught the light as she flipped through the papers before her. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft shuffling of feet and whispered conversations. This was her domain, a place where she had spent 15 years making decisions that affected people's lives. She took pride in her work and believed deeply in the importance of treating everyone equally under the law. Next case, she called out. Adjusting her glasses and looking up from her papers, Rebecca Johnson walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. The 32-year-old woman looked tired. Her simple blue dress wrinkled from a long and stressful morning. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had not slept well. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she carried herself with dignity, her back straight and her head held high. Judge Thompson watched Rebecca approach the bench. Something about the woman's manner caught her attention. Most people who came before her were either angry, defensive, or trying to make excuses. But Rebecca seemed different. There was a sadness in her eyes that went beyond the usual frustration of getting a traffic ticket. Double quotes Miss Johnson. You're charged with speeding 15 miles over the limit on Oak Street. Judge Thompson said, reading from her papers. Her voice was clear and professional, the same tone she used with everyone who appeared in her courtroom. The officer's report states that you were driving 45 miles per hour in a 30-mile browser. How do you plead? Guilty, Your Honor, Rebecca replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She did not try to explain or make excuses. She simply stood there, waiting for whatever punishment the judge would decide. Judge Thompson studied Rebecca's face more carefully. The woman's red eyes and distracted manner were obvious signs that she was upset about something. Her hands shook slightly as she clasped them in front of her. She kept glancing toward the door, as if she needed to be somewhere else. The judge had seen this before. Many people came into her courtroom hoping their tears or sad stories would earn them sympathy. Some would cry. Others would tell elaborate tales about sick relatives or financial problems. Judge Thompson had learned to be suspicious of such displays. She believed that showing favoritism or being too lenient would make her courtroom unfair. Miss Johnson, the judge said, her voice becoming firmer, speeding puts everyone at risk. When you drive too fast, you endanger not only yourself, but also other drivers, pedestrians and cyclists. The speed limit exists for good reasons, Rebecca nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. The law is clear, and I must enforce it fairly for all citizens. Judge Thompson continued, I cannot make exceptions based on personal circumstances or emotional appeals. That would not be just. She paused, looking down at the sentencing guidelines. The minimum fine for this offense was $200, but she had the authority to impose up to $500. Looking at Rebecca's defeated posture, she might have considered the lower amount on another day, but something about the woman's obvious distress made her suspicious. I'm fining you $500, payable within 30 days, the judge announced. If you cannot pay within that time, you may request a payment plan through the court clerk's office. Rebecca's shoulders sagged slightly, but she nodded again. I understand, Your Honor. Thank you. The response surprised Judge Thompson. Most people would have protested the maximum fine or asked for a reduction. Some would have become angry or started crying. But Rebecca simply accepted the punishment without complaint. She did not argue or plead for mercy. You may go, the judge said, already reaching for the next case file. As Rebecca turned to leave the courtroom, Judge Thompson noticed her slow, careful walk. The woman seemed to be carrying a heavy burden, something much heavier than a traffic. Fine. For just a moment, the judge wondered if she had been too harsh, but she quickly pushed the thought away. She had acted according to the law, and that was what mattered. Rebecca paused at the courtroom door and looked back once. Her eyes met the judge's for just a second before she walked out into the hallway. Judge Thompson felt a strange flutter in her chest, a feeling she could not quite identify as the door closed behind Rebecca. Judge Thompson called for the next case. She felt confident that she had done her job correctly. The law was the law, and everyone deserved equal treatment. Under it, personal circumstances could not be allowed to influence legal decisions. Little did she know that this case would change everything she thought she knew about justice. That evening, Judge Thompson drove through the quiet streets toward the Grand Hotel downtown. She had been invited to the annual Community Care Foundation dinner by her friend Margaret, who served on the board of directors. The judge rarely attended social events, preferring to spend her evenings at home with a good book and a cup of tea. But she believed in supporting local charities, and Margaret had been asking her to come for months. The Grand Hotel's banquet hall was transformed for the evening. Warm golden lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the round tables covered in white tablecloths. Fresh flowers decorated each table, and the air was filled with the gentle chatter of caring neighbors who had come together for a good cause. Judge Thompson looked round at the familiar faces from her community, people she recognized from the grocery store, the library, and the coffee shop on Main Street. She found her assigned table near the front of the room and settled into her chair. Margaret waved from across the room, busy greeting other guests and making sure everything was running smoothly. Judge Thompson picked up the program from her place sitting and read about the Foundation's work helping families in need throughout their small town. "Good evening, everyone," she said politely to the other people at her table. They were a mix of local business owners, retired teachers, and community volunteers. The conversation flowed easily as they talked about the weather, their families, and their hopes for the charity event. Judge Thompson expected this to be a routine evening. She would eat dinner, listen to some speeches about the foundation's good work, write a check for a modest donation, and be home by 9 o'clock. It was the kind of predictable social obligation that fit comfortably into her organized life. The waiters began serving the first course when the evening's host stepped up to the microphone at the front. Tea of the room. He was a tall man with grey hair whom Judge Thompson recognized as the owner of the local hardware store. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "before we begin our meal, I'd like to introduce someone very special. This evening's event would not have been possible without her months of hard work and dedication. Please welcome our event organizer, Rebecca Johnson." Judge Thompson nearly dropped her water glass. The crystal tumbler slipped in her fingers, and she had to catch it quickly before it fell to the floor. There, walking confidently toward the podium, was the same woman she had found that morning in her courtroom. But this Rebecca Johnson looked completely different from the tired, defeated woman who had stood before her bench just hours earlier. She wore a simple but elegant black dress that showed her natural grace. Her hair was neatly styled, and her makeup was carefully applied. Most striking of all, her face glowed with warmth and confidence as she approached the microphone. The audience applauded as Rebecca reached the podium. She smiled broadly, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. This was not the same person who had whispered guilty in a barely audible voice that morning. This Rebecca stood tall and proud, radiating the kind of energy that comes from doing work you truly believe in. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Rebecca began, her voice now strong and confident. "The transformation was remarkable. I want to tell you a story about why we're all here together. Judge Thompson leaned forward in her chair, completely focused on Rebecca's words. She could not believe this was the same woman who had seemed so broken and defeated in her courtroom. 2 years ago, I was walking through the Riverside neighborhood on a cold January morning. Rebecca continued. I noticed children walking to school without warm coats. Some had nothing but thin sweaters in the freezing winter weather. Their little faces were red from the cold, and they were shivering as they tried to hurry to get inside the warm school building. The judge listened in growing amazement as Rebecca painted a picture of children in need. Her voice carried genuine emotion as she described seeing kids with holes in their shoes and jackets that were too small or too worn to provide real warmth. I went home that day and couldn't stop thinking about those children, Rebecca said. I realized that while I was worried about my own problems, there were families in our community who couldn't afford basic necessities for their kids. Judge Thompson felt her chest tighten as she listened. She began to understand that Rebecca's distraction in the courtroom that morning had nothing to do with trying to avoid responsibility for her traffic violation. Tonight, thanks to your generosity and the hard work of our amazing volunteers, we've raised enough money to buy winter coats for over 200 children, Rebecca announced. Every single dollar you donate goes directly to keeping a child warm this winter. The audience burst into applause, and Judge Thompson found herself clapping along. She watched Rebecca's face light up with pure joy as she spoke about the children. This was the same woman who had stood before her bench just hours earlier, accepting a heavy fine without complaint or explanation. During dinner, Judge Thompson found herself unable to focus on the roasted chicken and vegetables on her plate. Her mind kept returning to Rebecca's transformation from the morning's defeated defendant to tonight's confident charity organizer. She pushed her food around with her fork, listening carefully to the conversations happening at the tables round. Rebecca is absolutely amazing, said Mrs. Williams, an elderly woman with silver hair at the table directly behind her. Judge Thompson recognized her as the librarian who had worked at the town library for over 30 years. She works 2 jobs just to pay her bills, but she still finds time to help others. I don't know how she does it. Judge Thompson's fork stopped moving. She turned slightly in her chair to hear better, pretending to look for the water pitcher while she listened. What kind of jobs does she do? Asked another woman at Mrs. Williams' table. She works at the diner on Main Street during the day, serving breakfast and lunch, Mrs. Williams explained. Then she cleans offices downtown in the evenings. She's there until almost midnight most nights, mopping floors and emptying trash cans, but she never complains about being tired. Judge Thompson felt a strange sensation in her chest. She had assumed Rebecca was just another careless driver who got caught speeding. She had never considered that the woman might be working multiple jobs just to survive. Did you know she volunteers at the homeless shelter every Saturday? Added Mr. Davis, a local shop owner whom Judge Thompson had seen round town for years. She's been doing it for 3 years, never missing a weekend. She serves meals, helps people find clothing, and even reads to the children who come in with their parents. The judge's stomach began to feel tight. She set down her fork and reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. Every Saturday for 3 years meant Rebecca had been volunteering over 150 times, giving up her only full day off from work to help people who had even less than she did. She has such a kind heart, continued another voice from a nearby table. My daughter goes to Roosevelt Elementary, and Rebecca volunteers there too. She helps kids with their reading during lunch breaks. The teacher says some of those children have improved so much because of her patience. Judge Thompson's friend Margaret, who had been talking to other board members, finally returned to their table and leaned over toward the judge. I'm so glad you could come tonight, Margaret said warmly. Did you know Rebecca organized this whole event by herself? She spent months planning it, making phone calls, ranging for the venue, coordinating with the caterers, and she did all of this while caring for her sick mother. The judge felt a knot forming in her stomach. Her mother is sick, she asked quietly. Yes. Her mother has been battling cancer for the past year, Margaret explained. Rebecca drives her to chemotherapy appointments twice a week, sits with her during the treatments, and helps her with everything at home. The medical bills are enormous, but Rebecca never talks about the financial stress. She just keeps working and helping others. Judge Thompson felt the blood drain from her face. Rebecca was not just working 2 jobs for herself. She was supporting her sick mother and paying for cancer treatments. The $500 fine she had imposed that morning was probably more money than Rebecca could easily spare. She's truly one of the most selfless people I've ever met, Margaret continued. When other people are complaining about their problems, Rebecca is out there solving problems for everyone else. The judge had seen Rebecca as just another traffic violator, someone who had broken the law and needed to be punished. But clearly, there was so much more to her story. Rebecca was a woman who worked tirelessly to support her family, volunteered countless hours to help others, and organized charity events to help children in need. After the dinner ended and people began to leave, Judge Thompson lingered near the entrance, watching as Rebecca thanked volunteers and helped clean up. She was about to leave when she overheard Rebecca talking to the event coordinator, a young man with a clipboard who was checking items off a list. "I'm sorry I was almost late setting up this morning," Rebecca was saying, her voice filled with genuine concern. "My neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, fell and broke her hip. I had to get her to the hospital before the ambulance arrived. I stayed with her until her daughter could get there from the next town." Judge Thompson's breath caught in her throat. She froze in place, her coat half on, as the full truth hit her like a physical blow. That explained everything. That explained why Rebecca had been speeding, why she looked so distracted and upset in court, why her eyes were red and her dress was wrinkled. She had been rushing to help someone in need, not thinking about herself or the speed limit. She had been racing to save her neighbor's life. The weight of her harsh judgment pressed down on Judge Thompson's shoulders like a heavy stone. She had imposed the maximum fine on a woman who had been performing an act of mercy. Judge Thompson tossed and turned in her bed that night, unable to find the peaceful sleep that usually came so easily to her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Rebecca's face, not the confident, glowing woman from the charity dinner, but the tired, defeated person who had stood before her bench that morning. She kept thinking about Rebecca's kind face and the way she had accepted the fine without making excuses or complaints. The clock on her nightstand glowed red in the darkness. 2:30 in the morning, 3:15, 4:45. Judge Thompson stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts she could not quiet. Rebecca could have explained about her neighbor's emergency. She could have told the court about rushing Mrs. Peterson to the hospital. Any reasonable person would have mentioned such circumstances, hoping for understanding or mercy. But Rebecca had chosen not to explain. She had simply accepted responsibility and the punishment that came with it. She had not tried to manipulate the court or gain sympathy. She had stood there with dignity, even when facing a fine that would clearly cause her financial hardship. When morning finally came, Judge Thompson felt exhausted. She went through her usual routine like a person moving through thick fog. She showered, dressed in her conservative business suit, and drove to the courthouse. But her mind was not on the day ahead. It was still stuck on the night before, on all the things she had learned about Rebecca Johnson. The judge sat in her chambers, staring at the law books that lined her walls from floor to ceiling. These books had been her guides for 15 years. They contained the rules and precedents that helped her make decisions every day. She had always believed that justice meant applying the law equally to everyone, without favor or prejudice. But now she wondered if she had confused justice with wholeness. Had she become so focused on treating everyone the same that she had stopped seeing them as individuals? Had she turned her courtroom into a place where the law was more important than the people it was meant to serve? She thought about her own journey to become a judge. 25 years ago, she had been a young lawyer fresh out of law school, full of idealism and hope. She had wanted to help people, to make a difference in their lives. She had dreamed of a courtroom where fairness and compassion worked together, where justice was both strong and kind. When had she lost sight of that dream? When had she stopped seeing people as individuals with their own struggles and stories? When had she become the kind of judge who imposed maximum fines without considering the circumstances that brought people before her? Judge Thompson stood up from her desk and walked to the window that overlooked the town square. Below, she could see people going about their daily lives. A mother pushing a stroller, an elderly man walking his dog, a group of children playing in the small park. Each of these people had their own story, their own challenges, their own reasons for the choices they made. She picked up her phone and called her clerk, a efficient young woman named Sarah who had worked for the court for 3 years. Please find out more about the Community Care Foundation. Judge Thompson said, I want to know how I can help. I want to know what programs they run, who they serve, and how someone like me might be able to contribute. Of course, Your Honor, Sarah replied. I'll have that information for you by this afternoon. When her morning court session ended, Judge Thompson did something she had never done before. Instead of eating lunch in her chambers and reviewing afternoon cases, she got in her car and drove to the Riverside neighborhood where Rebecca lived. She wanted to see for herself the community that Rebecca served. The neighborhood was older than the area where the judge lived. The houses were smaller, some needing paint or new roofs. But there was something warm about the place. People sat on their front porches. Neighbors talked to each other across fence lines, and children played in yards and on sidewalks. Judge Thompson parked her car and walked slowly down the street. She saw the children Rebecca had spoken about the night before. Some were playing in thin jackets despite the cold October air. Others wore coats that were clearly too big or too small, hand-me-downs from older siblings or donations from charity boxes. She watched a little girl, maybe 6 years old, trying to zip up a jacket that was torn along one side. The child's mother came out of the house, wearing a coat that was even more worn than her daughter's. The mother knelt down and helped the girl with the zipper, speaking softly to her in Spanish before kissing her forehead. Judge Thompson understood now why Rebecca's work mattered so much. These were not just statistics or case numbers. These were real families with real needs. People who were doing their best to get by in a world that often seemed stacked against them. She realized that true justice was not just about punishment. It was about understanding the whole person who stood before her bench. It was about seeing beyond the crime or violation to the human being underneath. She had been a judge for 15 years. But Rebecca had taught her something new about what it meant to serve justice with both strength and heart. A week later, Judge Thompson found herself walking through the front doors of the local library on a Tuesday evening. She had called the Community Care Foundation office that afternoon and learned they were having a planning meeting for their winter coat drive. The secretary had given her the address and told her the meeting started at 7 o'clock. Judge Thompson had never attended a community meeting like this before. She usually spent her evenings at home, reading legal journals or preparing for the next day's court cases. But something had changed inside her since the charity dinner. She felt drawn to understand more about the work Rebecca was doing and the people she was helping. The library's meeting room was small and simple, with fluorescent lights overhead and a dozen folding chairs ranged in a circle. When Judge Thompson arrived, she found Rebecca setting up chairs and arranging papers on a small table. Rebecca wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked up when the door opened, and her eyes widened with surprise. "Miss Johnson," the judge said quietly, standing in the doorway. "May I speak with you?" Rebecca straightened up, clearly surprised to see the judge who had fined her just a week earlier. For a moment, she looked uncertain, as if she was not sure why Judge Thompson was there. "Of course, Your Honor," Rebecca replied, her voice polite but cautious. Judge Thompson walked into the room and closed the door behind her. The space felt intimate and peaceful, so different from her formal courtroom with its high ceilings and imposing furniture. "Please, call me Emily," the judge said, sitting down in one of the folding chairs. "I hope you don't mind that I came tonight. I wanted to talk with you about something important." Rebecca sat down in the chair next to her, folding her hands in her lap. She looked nervous, as if she was wondering whether she had done something wrong. "I owe you an apology," Judge Thompson said, looking directly into Rebecca's eyes. "After the charity dinner last week, I learned about your neighbor's emergency. I learned about all the work you do in our community. I should have listened more carefully in my courtroom." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "You don't need to apologize. You were doing your job. You had no way of knowing what was happening in my life. But that's just it," Judge Thompson said, leaning forward slightly. "I thought my job was only to apply the law, to treat everyone exactly the same way. You've shown me that real justice requires understanding the people behind the cases." The judge reached into her purse and pulled out a folded check. She had spent considerable time that morning deciding on the amount, finally settling on a sum that would make a real difference for the Coat Drive. "This is for your Coat Drive," she said, handing the check to Rebecca. "It's from my personal account, not from the court. I want to support what you're doing here." Rebecca unfolded the check and looked at the amount. Her eyes widened, and she gasped softly. "This is too much. I can't accept this." "You can, and you will," the judge said with a gentle smile. "But I want to do more than just donate money. I've been thinking about this all week, and I have an idea." Rebecca looked at her curiously, still holding the check with trembling hands. "I want to learn from you," Judge Thompson continued. "Would you help me start a community service program in my court, instead of just imposing fines and punishments? I want to give people opportunities to address the root causes of their problems." Rebecca's face lit up with understanding. "You mean like helping people find jobs, or connecting them with social services, or providing counseling?" "Exactly," the judge said. "I want my courtroom to be a place where people can get help, not just punishment. I want to create programs that actually make our community stronger." From that day forward, Judge Thompson's courtroom became a different place. She still upheld the law and held people accountable for their actions, but she also took time to understand the circumstances that brought them before her. She worked with social workers, job counselors, and community volunteers to create programs that addressed problems like poverty, addiction, and lack of education. Rebecca became her partner in this work, helping design programs that truly served their community. Together, they created a network of support that helped people rebuild their lives instead of just punishing them for their mistakes. The Coat Drive that year clothed over 500 children throughout the county, but more importantly, it had brought together two women who learned that the greatest changes come when we open our hearts to understanding each other. Judge Thompson discovered that justice was not just about applying rules fairly. It was about seeing the whole person who stood before her bench, understanding their struggles, and helping them find a better path forward. Rebecca learned that sometimes the people who seem the most rigid and unforgiving are actually capable of the greatest growth and change. Together, they proved that justice and compassion could work hand in hand, creating a stronger and more caring community for everyone.